Close Up, brought to you by Kia Motors. Kia, the power to surprise.
Are we in danger of becoming slaves in our own country? Are farm sales to overseas investors selling out our self-reliance? Or is this merely short-sighted xenophobia and overreaction? We'll be debating this issue shortly, but what do you think? A close-up poll tonight. Should farm sales to overseas investors be banned? Text yes or no to 8875, usual conditions, of course. One man, though, is putting it all on the line for this issue. John McKerney, a successful property developer, probably can be excused for having more important things on his mind right now. He hasn't been in the best of health, but that hasn't stopped him putting his energy and his money into the Save Our Farm campaign. So who is this guy, and why should he be telling us who we should be able to sell our own property to? And who exactly are we saving our farms from?
Well, we want to save them from overseas investors, foreign investors, who won't be part of our country landscape, who'll shift profits overseas and take them away from the fabric of New Zealand's life.
When you say foreigners, is it the Chinese?
No, I'm not xenophobic at all. I've worked overseas for many years, I've travelled the world widely. I love the people in the world, I love the world, but more importantly, I think New Zealand's God's own, and I want to protect it for my countrymen and future generations.
But you know, some people look at this campaign and they think, it's anti-foreigner, you guys have got a problem with foreigners.
It's not anti-foreign, it's just that the farms in New Zealand are the backbone of our economy.
Are you a bit old-fashioned? Because we were told this is the free market. You know, if you can't make it work, or if someone wants to export it, that's just the way it goes.
Well, foreign investment's fine. I mean, you know, New Zealand would like foreign investment where it helps. And, you know, if we can have some foreign investment directed down to New Zealand to make a widget factory that we can employ some people here, and it's something new for our country and re-export, or someone wants to come down and buy a cornerstone of a New Zealand industry that can help us market overseas and add value to the industry in New Zealand and create good employment, we're more than welcome. But not to sell the jewel in our crown, which is our land. I would hate to cause grief with our future generations that we found out that we're serfs in our own country. The profits go overseas, don't get reinvested in the likes of Morrinsville, our communities break down, and our fabric of life disappear.
So you're not saying that no foreigner can buy land in this country?
Not necessarily, but that's in the detail, and that's what's up for debate.
Okay, so what's the difference, say, between Julian Robertson coming in and buying land and the Chinese consortium wanting to buy the Crayford farms?
Because Julian Robertson hasn't come here to take over our productive land. We're talking about 2 golf courses and some tourist resorts. He's come over here because he loves our country.
But we don't own our own banks.
Well, isn't that a problem? Isn't that a shame? Do we want to not own anything? Well, how are we going to pay overseas for these things? Are we just going to be slaves to the world?
You don't trust foreign interests owning our prime land?
I don't trust the corporate, which is most likely bigger than New Zealand, getting involved in starting our farms.
So would it make any difference whether the foreign investors are American, Chinese, Dutch, Iranian?
It's got nothing to do with it. It's got nothing to do with it.
For someone who hasn't been well, you'd think you'd be putting your energies into, I'd be kicking back.
This is too important to, and why let it start? So we might as well nip it in the bud and have our discussions before it gets underway with foreign ownership of any great extent, overseas owners.
John McKerney there. And of course, this debate has been highlighted by the proposed sale of the Crayford farms to Chinese interests. Joining me now from Rotorua, Alan Crayford. And here in Auckland, someone who hasn't always seen eye to eye with him on this issue, and many others, Bernard Hickey. Bernard Hickey, myopic and xenophobic, you called this campaign.
Yes, it doesn't make sense to focus firstly on the Crayfor Farms. This Save the Farms campaign, their first demand is to say, let's stop the purchase of Crayfor Farms by this group of Chinese interests. And they're focusing specifically on farmland. This would not have happened if the Chinese interests had not looked to buy Crayfor Farms. This is something that really has come about because not just the Chinese interests in Crayfor Farms, but the growth of China and the worries, and something that John Key has talked about Chinese interests taking over our farmland.
To be fair, though, I mean, talking to John McKinney, they're saying, look, we don't care whether it's Chinese or whether it's American or who it is. Farming is the backbone of our country. You know, it's our means of production. We need to protect it.
Why is farming so different from our banks, from our media, from half of our supermarkets? Why is it okay for people to be working for... Why is it okay for people to be working for banks and not be called serfs, where when you're working for a farm that's owned by a foreign company, you are called a serf? It doesn't make sense.
Alan Crayfor, I'm sure you would have liked to have seen more of the banks owned here than overseas. Look, as a farm owner, what do you think about a law that would dictate who you could sell your farm to?
Well, I don't think that foreign ownership is the real problem. We've already got foreign ownership in the form of foreign-owned banks, and that's the problem. The New Zealand farmers aren't keen to sell out to overseas interests necessarily, but they're driven to do it by their foreign-owned banks.
Does it make any difference to you, Alan Crayfor, who you sell your farms to?
Well, yes, because I'd rather not sell them at all. I'd rather that if you want to keep 4th, 5th and 6th generation New Zealanders on their land, the best option for our farms is to put us back in charge and not leave it to people, and apologise for the state you've got them in, I might add.
But so a campaign like this, which says, look, we want to stop foreign investors buying up farms here, you wouldn't support that?
I think its heart's in the right place. I mean, land in New Zealand is New Zealanders are quite emotionally attached to the land. Unfortunately, we haven't got enough people out there working on it now. They're all sitting around in grizzling and moaning about what we should and shouldn't do on the land instead of getting out there and doing some useful work.
Bernard Hickey, look, it has touched a nerve, hasn't it? Because people are very sensitive about this. I mean, and even, as I say, go back to talking to John McKinney, I mean, it would get a lot of sympathy in terms of Maori. You've seen their land disappear over the years. This could turn into a political issue. It
already is, and John Key has raised it with the review of the Overseas Investment Act. It is a debate that we should have, but to limit it to Chinese ownership of farmland just doesn't make sense. If we're going to have capital controls, let's look at it in a wider sense, because we also need to look at, if we are going to control who owns the land, we're essentially voting for lower land prices. Are New Zealanders ready for blocking off the buyers of our land? For example, we've got a real estate company in China at the Shanghai Expo trying to sell $800 million worth of land.
New Zealanders won't bank with each other. They won't bank, even our KiwiSaver funds are invested overseas, vast majority invested overseas. The managers of which take a 6% cut every year, whether you make money or lose money on it, instead of investing it back in New Zealand at a lower rate and getting rid of a lot of the managers of it, making a more efficient use of it. New Zealanders have got to bank with themselves.
But Alan Crayfor, if this thing does pick up a head of steam, you're going to get this debate between the rights of an individual like yourself to sell to who you like to, and the rights of the country to say, we want to hold on to what we consider to be an important part of not only our economy, but our culture.
Oh, well, the country can make whatever rules it likes, as long as, I think if the rules were the same for whatever country's trying to buy, if we could go and buy in that country under the same terms, it'd be okay. But the problem is most New Zealand farmers don't want to sell in this present market. Nobody in their right mind would sell in this present market. The problem is the foreign-owned banks are forcing it to happen. Those bank boys that are out there selling money and were getting a bonus of $1,000 a million to get rid of it are now getting $3,000 a million to get it back in.
OK, listen, Bernard, can it actually work? I mean, could we frame a workable law that says anyone buying it and residing overseas and taking the profits out is cut out?
Capital controls can be put in, and in fact the International Monetary Fund has suggested that even some developing countries should keep their capital controls. But for us to do it would require a major reintroduction of legislation. We'd have to dig up Robert Muldoon to help us to do it. And is that really what New Zealand wants? For the last 20 years we've learned to become an open country that invites in capital. If we were to close our borders again, we should expect to have lower standards of living, higher interest rates, lower land prices. Is that what we really want?
OK, so we do need to have Alan Crafer. Thanks for your time, Bernard Hickey. Okay. Thank you. So what do you think? Should farm sales to overseas investors be banned? Now, that's to investors who live and keep their profits overseas. Vote in our close-up poll. Text yes or no to 8875. We'll have the results later in the program. Now, the results of our poll, as I said, we have had literally thousands. We asked you whether you think farm sales to overseas investors should be banned. Let's see what you thought. We got over 25,000 votes. Here's the results. Oh, jeepers, that's 75 to 25. 3/4 of you agree farm sales to overseas investors should be banned. And I'd have to say that is one of the biggest results we've had from a close-up poll since the infamous Ginga poll. So a lot of you certainly concerned about that issue.